My presentation. My presentation will be about the information lost in the process of digitizing objects. A portion of the presentation will be looking at the nature of the relationship between digital surrogates and their original objects, as well as the benefits, compared to the flaws, of digitization. I will also be taking a look at how in some cases digitization is better than not digitizing an object, at least in terms of preservation and access. Most of my content for this presentation will be coming from the Donald C. Force and Randy Smith article, Context Lost: Digital Surrogates, Their Physical Counterparts, and the Metadata That Is Keeping Them Apart. As it turns out, there aren't that many scholarly resources that deal with digital surrogates, and the aforementioned article was the only one that I could find that dealt specifically with lost context. So I will be instead supplementing my main article with two additional ones. The Riddell and Bassett article, What Library Digitization Leaves Out, Predicting the Availability of Digital Surrogates of English Novels, and the Lander article, Silences in the Lambs, Digital Surrogacy in the Time of the Pandemic, an introduction. What is a digital surrogate? From what I've read, a digital surrogate is a digital object that serves as a digital or digitized copy or recreation of a tangible physical object that serves as a replacement, substitute, or facsimile of said physical object. An example could be, for instance, a scanned copy of financial records from an 1800s general store whose used copies will be viewed by the general public. As Force and Smith note, and early on in their research paper, research conducted in digitized archival collections may result in a different experience than would have occurred had the same researcher conducted the same research in person. They also point out that, while metadata can hinder their ability to understand the archival materials adequately, or to recognize any potential distinctions between the digital surrogate and the original physical materials, or to recognize any potential distinctions between the digital surrogate and the original physical materials. The contextual information of the original physical objects, that is, the historical trends, events, and figures related to the materials, is essential for the researchers to know that the records they are using are trustworthy, to understand the full context of both the digital and physical parts of the collection, and to identify any distinctions between the digital surrogate and the physical original. Force and Smith cite an article by Kim Martin and Annabelle Kwan-Haas, where it was discovered that the physical environment, that is, the location where historians access the materials, plays an important role in how they construct their stories, because the physical interaction that the historians have with the materials can influence serendipity. Additionally, the two note that, as archivists strive to turn their analog holdings into digital archival collections, there has been no shortage of discourse about the archival process involved. Archivists have made it clear that three of the primary reasons for digitizing archival materials are, first, to provide access to the specific materials, second, to increase exposure to the archival institution as holdings, and third, to prolong the existence of the original materials through reduced usage. Furthermore, one part of the study noted that there was a general absence of links to finding aids in the repositories they researched, something that may be explained by how the archival institutions compile their digitized archival collections. The majority of the digitized archival collection in our dataset, that is, Force and Smith's, appear to be artificial, that is, collections that include digital surrogates that represent two or more physical archival collections, either within the hosting repository or from multiple repositories and/or different institutions. Also, Force and Smith continue. While a link to a finding aid may be one of the clearest indications of this relationship between virtual and physical, as well as revealing other materials within the physical collection, Other metadata fields could possibly indicate to the users that the virtual object represents a physical object. From the complete list of metadata fields, we believe that the following 9 elements best indicate that a digital surrogate represents a physical object. Format of original, original item collection, original item ID, source collection number, original item medium, original item size, original medium, source collection name. Continuing, they add that the final research question they asked was, assuming that users know that the digital surrogate represents a physical object, whether or not the metadata present facilitates user access to the object in the archives. They added that, although archivists should ensure that their websites are appropriately structured and offer information to be of value to researchers, not all researchers encounter digital surrogates via the digitized archival collection's main web portal or via the archives' homepage. Ultimately, the duo came to the conclusion that digitized archival collections are valuable to historical research, but they may also be detrimental to such research if the context of their creation and display is not properly understood. Users need to be made aware that what they see online may not be the whole story of an object, and they need to be provided with adequate details. The two then provide a variety of recommendations with the intention of facilitating access to the original physical object that a digital surrogate represents, so the suggestions do not consider all the metadata that might be captured for each digital surrogate. Some of the general recommendations are, for general, use clear, concise, and consistent field names. Borson Smith found several examples of a lack of clarity about the purpose of the metadata field, adding as an example, some repositories use the term source to denote an item identified, but others use it to represent a collection number. Minimize ambiguous fields. Creating clear and concise field names should alleviate ambiguity, but it is worth repeating that each metadata field should correspond to only one concept. And avoid duplicate elements. To keep the metadata associated with individual digital surrogates as concise as possible, every effort should be made to avoid the duplication of metadata elements. For example, making sure that title only appears once. They also give recommendations for collection-specific metadata fields, which include accession number, the number primarily for the repository's usage, as users may not know what it indicates. Collection number. This number is more for the repository and less for the users, as they may not know its meaning. Box and folder number. This offers an additional piece of information that may facilitate retrieval of the original object that users may reference when contacting the repository, and it indicates the existence of a physical object. Format of original object. Indicates that a physical version of the digital surrogate exists. Number of objects digitized. This is important for providing more context to researchers in that archivists can provide information about how many digitized objects from the original collection have been scanned. Original collection name. In the case of artificial collections, the name of the digitized archival collection may not mirror the name of the collection associated with the original physical objects. Digital surrogate statement. A statement that indicates that it represents a physical object as opposed to being a born digital or altered digital file. And URL to finding aid. A hyperlink to a digital or digitized finding aid that identifies the location of the original physical object. Repository-specific metadata fields and recommendations. Name of the repository, or in other words, which repository is responsible for the digitized archival collection and, as appropriate, also responsible for the corresponding physical object. Repository contact information. At the very least, a URL to the repository's homepage should be included in the metadata field that directs users to the Contact Us or About Us page. and a URL to the landing collection and to the collection landing page and archival repository. Conversely, Beth Lander notes that digital surrogates are vital if the physical object is inaccessible, as was the case during the midst of the SARS-2 coronavirus pandemic, when most of the museums and institutions that house physical objects were forced to close. Lander opted to expand the basic question of what happens to history when artifacts become digitized to what happens to history when one cannot access the archives. A later point is made in the paper that it is critical to give students access to high-quality primary sources, physical or digital, in an intentional way that facilitates learning. However, digitization can also be biased. Alan Riddell and Troy J. Bassett found in their article What Digitization Leaves Out, Predicting the Availability of Digital Surrogates of English Novels, that certain kinds of novels, mostly those written by men and published in a multi-volume format, have digital versions available at distinctly higher rates than the other kinds of novels. In conclusion, the answer to the question of can digital surrogates be as good as their physical counterparts, the answer appears to be yes, but only if the metadata for the surrogates is extremely rich and detailed. The problem is that context-rich descriptions with detailed metadata for digital surrogates and clear linkages back to the physical analog object are the exceptions rather than the rule for digitized collections. However, sometimes digitization, or even partial digitization, is better than no digitization at all, as circumstances during the pandemic proved to be the case. Finally, digital surrogates can be vulnerable to bias, as was the case with the amount of digitized works that were multi-volume and written by male authors. And these are my citations.